liberty and security of persons. Article 4, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. So if this thing actually applied to you as a human being, would that not be a form of slavery? What do you call it when you send someone to work? Actually, what is today? Today is Tax Freedom Day. There, now you're actually working for yourself tomorrow, right? On average in Canada, I think BC is actually into July 3rd or something like that. Article 17, everyone has the right to own property alone as and well in association with others, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. So I hope you're starting to see, wherever you look at any level of government, any level of bureaucracy, you're starting to see the same thing. Your human rights are recognized and protected. And that really creates this essence of this legal maxim. I like a legal maxim because what it is, it's an absolute truth in law. And they're really based on a lot of logic, reason, and understanding. This one here, actus legis nimium facit injuriam. An act of law does injury to no man. I know that's hard to believe when you've been spending the last 20 years under the Income Tax Act. Translation, an act of law is to be so limited in its operation that none of your rights shall be prejudiced. We look at this and go, that means that none of these statute laws and these laws that they pass can actually hurt us? And it's hard to believe, but when we look at the reason behind this, let's think about it. When we as individuals came together and formed a society, you think we would create a government, like we came together, created the government because you need a government, and give that government enough power to hurt us? Of course not. So that's the logic and the thinking behind this. So when we start looking at all these human rights, and you know, it starts adding that frustration. It's like, because the real question we need to be asking, if we have all these rights and freedoms, then why do we feel like we're slaves? Right? If what we just said had any validity, then why? What's happening that we feel so enslaved that whatever they tell us we have to do? To answer that, we have to start asking other questions like, what kind of person are you? And I don't mean like, oh, I'm a real nice person, I walk my neighbor's dog a couple times a week. This. No, legally. See, that's the real world. In the legal world, what kind of person are you? This legal maxim, I don't even like reading that one, so it's really hard. I'm not even trying. Every person is a man, but not every man is a person. Say that again. Every person is a man, but not every man is a person. Man or woman, so you can interject that, right? That's sort of like a little brain twister, but when we actually can step back and see it in an example, it wasn't too long in our history before where women weren't allowed to vote. Why? Weren't they human beings? Of course they were. But they were not recognized as a person in law. So we're starting to see what's called a duality of person. Blackstone Commentaries again, book 1, page 123, goes, persons are divided by law into either natural persons or artificial. And this is about all I knew when I stood in court the first time from the perspective of this information. I had a lot of history stuff, and he goes on to explain that. He goes, natural persons are such as God of nature formed us. Artificial are such as created and devised by human laws for the purpose of society and government, which are called corporations and body politics. So I need to point something out here for later. This is back in the 1800s, late 1700s. They used the word corporation. That was way long before we had incorporated companies. So basically, artificial persons, another word for them is corporation. So don't get that confused with incorporated companies. That makes sense later. So I saw that, but again, that was from the 18th century. And I'm thinking, does that still apply in Canada today? So I went to a corner store, actually over in the mall, and got Canadian Law Dictionary. Opened it up, flipped through, and said, does this natural person still exist? Natural person is a human being that has the capacity for rights and duties. Artificial person, a legal entity, not a human being. Recognized as a person in law to whom legal rights and duties may attach. So here's today's first pop quiz. How many people here are a natural person? See, to me, that's how simple it was. But I remember the first time I ever seen the word natural person, it was like, what is that? We actually did a little article that got printed up on somewhere in Banff in a little newspaper. And the guy at the newspaper, he says, yeah, some people think a natural person is someone naked running through the woods. You know, so it's like, it was a really weird concept to actually see it. So what's this artificial person? It's a legal, it's a figment of man's imagination. It's two-dimensional. So we had a hard time explaining to people, or people to visualize what these artificial people look like, so we made one. And that's basically a two-dimensional illusion, created in the mind of man that you can actually represent. So that's where we're at when we start looking at the duality of person, and we take that inside this legal system, some things start making a little bit more sense. I started looking, well, does this natural person exist in statute law? So I went through tons of them and stuff, and I found it all over the place. Not in every one, but generally quite a lot of them. Out of the Excise Tax Act, the GST Act, it goes individual, means a natural person. Is that pretty clear or what? Okay? No issue there. And then they say when we use the word person, it means the individual, which means the natural person. So we know when we're in there somehow. We're going to look at that later. How are we in there? Then I went to the Bank Act. I haven't counted in person. One of the educators said there's like 56 times they have the word natural person in the Bank Act. So this thing started to become more of a reality into my life, whether I understood it or not. They go there, person means a natural person, an entity, or a personal representative. Pretty clear, right? So we know we're there. I read on in the Act a little bit, came to 15.1, and look what it said the bank was. It goes, a bank has the capacity of a natural person. Now some people looked and says, oh, banks are natural persons. No, they're not. They have the capacity, which means they're over 18 and they're mentally competent. I know we could argue that second one there for a bit, but nonetheless. Okay? And subject to this Act, the rights, powers, and privileges of a natural person. So this is what we need to think about. Maybe why have they held this from us? Why isn't this taught in our schools so we know who we are? Have you ever gone traveling around and go to big cities? What are the biggest buildings in all those cities? And who owns them? The banks. Yet are they more powerful than you? If we start looking at it from this perspective, the bank has the capacity, they're over 18 and they're technically mentally competent, but they're subject to this Act. Are you? No. So who has more rights, powers, and privileges, you or a bank? See, maybe that's why they didn't want us to know who we really were in this legal system. Because their power only comes from us being naive or ignorant of our rights from within it. And this came to that point, it's like when I saw this duality, and we knew it had something to do with capitalization, is after our first, we were very fortunate. Our first appearance, how'd that go? First appearance, we actually went in there, and we were very fortunate. It was just before Christmas. And so I started talking about this capitalization, who do you want, this, that, and everything, and the judge says, look, we're really backed up. They had about 100 things to do that day, and it's getting near Christmas, so everybody's pushing. He goes, let's just set this over, you come back again. Well, because it was near Christmas, we actually had about a month break between our first appearances, eh? So we went over to the bookstore. I mean, I grabbed law dictionaries, and I sat there, and because I knew it had something to do with capitalization, I started looking up capitalization. Because what do we think when we say the word capitalize? Well, just to put a big letter on something. But let's look at it in its adjective sense, to take advantage of. Used to one's own advantage. So when you look at that, I say, if you capitalized on something, whose advantage would it be for? Yours. If they capitalized on something, whose advantage would it be for? Theirs. So you start understanding the aspects of it. As I was going through there, I came across this, this concept called capitis diminutio. And for some reason, I knew what it said when I saw it, primarily because my paperwork all reflected the same layers of it. Okay, capitis is Latin for head, your heading, your captain. Diminutio means to diminish, to take away. Okay, so it's a Roman law concept, not common law. It's a diminishing or abridgment of a personality, a loss or curtailment of a man's status or aggregate of legal attributes and qualifications. And this here is what we saw on my court paper, some different forms of capitalization. And we never understood what they meant until we actually got a little bit further study on it. But let's start off with this point here. What did I just write on the board here? Did I write a name? I just write words? What are they? From our rules of English construction, these are just two words. What, slang for an outhouse and a female deer. But what if you like the sound of those? John Doe. Say them. John Doe. Hey, I like those. So what are you going to do to them? You're going to capitalize on them. And voila, now what is it? It's your name. And that's how our names are. We just capitalize on words we sound. And this is us as a natural person in this legal system. It's a right that we have. Have you ever watched like Crime Stoppers or something where they're looking for Dave Smith, Bob Jones, a.k.a. AK 20 list? He never gets arrested for that because it's a natural right. You can change your name every day as long as you don't do what? Use it for criminal purposes to hurt other people, right? So I looked at that, and some of my paperwork had this form of capitalization on it. And what that was capitis diminutio minima, the lowest or least comprehensive degree of loss of status. So we lost some status, but how did it relate to that? And this occurred where a man's family relations alone were changed. It happened upon the pride of a person who had been his own master. You see, before you plug into this legal system, guess what? You're a sovereign individual. You under no man's laws, you're a country unto your own. So you got to make a decision. Do you like this country or not? Or do you want to leave? And so at the point you're your own master. So what you've done is you say, no, I want to plug into a system. I'll give up some of my rights. And what you're doing is you're plugging yourself under a social contract. Canada has a beautiful, pure social contract. It infringes on our rights so minutely, but it also gives us the protection of the system, so it's a fair exchange, okay, of his own right, not under any legal disability, or upon the emancipation of one who'd been under patria potesta, parental authority, one who's been freed from parental authority. It's talking about our children.